Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in AP English, and we turn in our study of Dante's Inferno now to Canto 17. With Canto 17, with 34 cantos obviously, we are halfway now through the Inferno. I'm going to call this one Canto 17. The Dante meets the usurers, and we're going to have a tongue sticking out, which is going to be kind of maybe bizarre. And then we're going to have the flight into Circle 8, where we have simple fraud, riding on the back of Geryon. So let's get ready to do that. Now, if you haven't been following my lectures on LearnStrong.net, very much recommend that you go to LearnStrong.net, find the AP folder. My assumption in these sets of comments is that you're familiar with all the stuff that we've said about the Iliad up through St. Augustine's Confessions. And we've also given summary lectures over Cantos 1 through 16. Let's just review where we've been. I think it's one of the teachings of the Inferno that if you're going to go forward, it makes sense to always pause every once in a while and review where you've been. And that way you've got some sense of kind of the direction that you're headed. And maybe you want to make adjustments along the way. There's no question that this is a difficult journey for Dante the Pilgrim. Can I say this out loud? It's also, since we're halfway through the Inferno, it's also a difficult journey for us as readers, for any number of reasons. As we even review here, we can point out the moments in the poem when we become frustrated or we're uncertain, in the same ways that Dante the Pilgrim is frustrated and uncertain. In Canto 1, it's the 7th of April, 1300, Good Friday. 35-year-old Dante the Pilgrim is lost in a dark wood. He wants to go up the mountain of God. There's three animals there, the lion, the leopard, the leopard, the lion, the wolf, in order, and he's not allowed. Virgil appears in Canto 2 with the invocation of the Muse. We get the story from Virgil that Beatrice is the one that sent him, and that Dante now is ready to go. In Canto 3, the inscription of Hell, Abandon Hope, All Ye Who Enter Here, and the Uncommitted. In Canto 4, we have Limbo in Circle 1, the unbaptized pagans. Of course, Virgil himself included there with Homer and Aristotle. In the 5th, 6th, and the 7th canto, we have the incontinent, those who were weak of will. In Canto 5, we have Circle 2. These are the jacked lovers, as we've said. Dido, of course, Francesco and Paolo are the two that we actually see. In Canto 6, Circle 3, we have the gluttons and Chaco and the prophecy about Florence, as well as Final Judgment Day. In Canto 7, we have Circle 4, the prodigals and the avaricious pushing around the rocks, and Circle 5, the Styx, with the wrathful and the sullen, who difficult speaking. In Canto 8, we have Philogis, who is going to help to take them across the river Styx, with Philippa Gente reaching up, and Dante, for one of the few times in the early part of Inferno, being nasty with one of the sinners. Then we reach the city of Dis, the city of Satan, the city of hell, and they're not allowed in. This is Circle 6, of course. In Canto 9, the gates of Dis are opened by an angel, a disdainful angel, who says to those fallen angels, "What were you thinking?" Right? In Canto 10, we have Dante's famous conversation with Farinata and Cavalcante, two Florentines who he knows. In Canto 11, we have Virgil giving a map of the rest of hell. Go back to that lecture and remember that I said dog-ear that part of the book, because although it seems like an insignificant moment where, okay, let's take a breather because the stench is so bad right above this Circle 6, it really is kind of the map of the rest of what's going on. Like, for example, we're going to hear about things that we will only see later. Like, for example, these users that we're about to just get a glimpse of. And yet in Canto 11, we're going to be told why these people are there. Violent against art, which is kind of bizarre. We'll have to talk about it here in a bit. Okay. Starting in Canto 12, we have the violent, and we go then Canto 12, Circle 7. We have different rings, rounds or rings. Ring or round number 1. We have the Minotaur, the centaurs. We have the violent against neighbors. This is Pelagion. This is the river of blood. In Canto 13, we have Circle 7, round 2. This is the violent against self, the suicides, the talking trees. In Canto 14, we have Circle 7, Ring 3, the violent against God. These are the blasphemers. This is Copernicus and his almost like, how did we say, a Promethean-like disdain for God. In Canto 15 and 16, we meet the sodomites, those who engaged in perversions of sexual behaviors, as Dante in the church will define it in 1300. In Circle 7, Ring 3, we'll have the violent against nature, as they call it. In other words, any sex act, as we said in our lectures, any sex act that does not promote procreation or the giving of children directly is constituted as a perversion of nature, violence against nature. And there, interestingly, Dante, the poet, will put the great one he admires, Brutino Latini, there, and the exchange between them is very reverential. There is no comment whatsoever of how terrible an act sodomy is, etc., etc. They're just there in this place with fire and nastiness raining down on them. Pain, in other words. And in Circle 16 that we just finished, we finish with this one, and we have 3 from Florence that will come and in a ring around Dante will turn, because you can't stop in hell, and Dante will show tremendous respect to them. It will be then at this point that they will meet or get ready with the rope that they will hang over the edge for Geryon. Now, the hope again is that you read this material on your own, that you're always reminded of our learning theory, that desire to connect new information to old information in meaningful ways. We have our 3 levels of annotation that we're always working with to meet those learning outcomes of connecting new to old. At level 1, we ask the question, what does the text say? At level 2, we ask the question, what does the text mean? 2A, themes, messages. 2B, the rhetorical level of our reading. We're concentrating here in our study of Inferno, like we did in our studies of the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Aeneid, and a few other texts like Beowulf as well, on symbolism and irony, and then asking about Dante as poet, as politician, and as philosopher. Finally, we ask the question, how can I relate this information to 3A, other texts I know, obviously beginning with the Iliad and everything that we've studied in AP, and of course, finally, how can I relate it to myself? So a real brief summary of Canto 17. In some ways, it's a canto that can be easily overlooked if we're not careful, but I think there's some important stuff going on here that I want us to see. We are going to have Geryon who will arrive. Now this is one more of those mythic creatures that in many ways Dante kind of creates, although he borrows, as we said in our past lecture, from the book of Revelation, this strange creature with a scorpion-like tail and all of that. One more monster that's going to help them get then to the next level. If we move from incontinence to violence, we're finally ready to move now to fraud, is the way it's going to be usually translated. I like to think of it more like deception of a kind, okay? But we'll get there in a bit. Dante will then walk up to a usurer. This is a single person in Rinal di Scorvoni. And in here, it's interesting. There is no dialogue. There is no actual discussion at all. Totally unlike what happened in the realm of the Sodomites, where Dante was able to have exchange. Here, all we get is a question, why are you here? And then the guy will stick his tongue out at him. Well, have these users that sit hunched, and you can't recognize them anymore. Notice how this takes us back to that view that rage will remove one's identity. Here, quest to make money will remove one's identity. And all he does is he sticks his tongue out at him. Of course, this thing about the users, we said a little bit about when we did Canto 11. Let's return. The idea is simply this. If God wills, in the book of Genesis, the 3rd chapter after the quote-unquote fall of Adam and Eve, although the word never actually gets used in the 3rd chapter of Genesis, St. Augustine, as we've said in our St. Augustine lectures, will definitely define Genesis 3 as the fall of humankind and all of that, and it's a convenient way we'll remember to blame women, Eve especially, for what she's done. We'll hold on to a lot of those kinds of conversations until we get to Milton's Paradise Lost later. If that is what happened, then you'll remember that afterwards God said that if you want to call it a curse, certainly it's an edict that says humans will define, especially men, will define who they are by how they work. And the sweat of the brow. In other words, they're going to have to go out into the fields, they're going to have to work. Well, what is usury? Usury is taking the labor money of another individual and using it to make more money, but without any kind of actual physical labor. In other words, this is violence against art. Now, the way we mean art here is we mean honest work. Okay, that's what we mean by art. God's design might be a way to think about it. So what makes usury so violent is that it betrays the very commandment of God that you have to work and create sweat. Now, any of us that have spent any time on Wall Street will say, what are you talking about? Wall Street, clearly, you sweat all the time. But this is a different understanding because we're reading this poem now from a postmodern perspective, no question, but we of course live in a capitalist society where making money is the whole way that we sustain our life, yes? In other words, we have a different kind of understanding of the socioeconomics, and therefore when we read this, just like when we read a whole bunch of the other stuff that came before, go back to our comments, for example, on sexual practices that were defined by the church as being so, immoral or whatever. Same gig going on here, but we will point out, notice usury is even lower in hell than is sodomy, or even blasphemy for that matter. And again, in Dante's paradigm, every time you go deeper, it's a worse sin. So usury for Dante and the church is considered a pretty bad type of thing to do. And yet, in this canto, we really don't have an exchange at all. Dante gets this guy to stick his tongue out at him, and then Dante goes, oh, okay, enough of that. And he goes back, they jump on the back of the Geryon, and off they go to head towards the 8th circle of hell, which will be the circle of fraud. Think of that. If we're in the 8th circle, and hell has 9 circles, we've only got 2 circles left, and we still got half of the Inferno to read. What's going on? Well, we're going to have subsets within those circles so that Dante can punish a whole bunch of different sinners in very creative ways. Let's now turn to this canto itself, and let's just enjoy the reading of this canto. And I do mean it when I say enjoy. I think the Robert Pinsky translation is one that can easily be read and enjoyed. For example, notice right away that we're carrying on from canto number 16 with canto 17, and the first word is behold, more sight words. In other words, I think Pinsky has done an outstanding job of rendering out of the Italian the notion that what Dante wants us to do is to have better sight. Just like Plato, just like Aristotle, just like St. Augustine, the idea is how you come to understand. In other words, seeing is not just physical sight, but insight, that perspicacity that we talked about. Behold the beast that has the pointed tail, that crosses mountains, leaves walls and weapons broken, and makes the stench of which the world is full. Geryon is the exemplar of fraud, deception, deceit, lying, all of those things. So did my leader address me, then paused to beckon him ashore, that is to say Geryon, near where the causeway came to an end, and fraud's foul emblem came closer, till he had taken his head and chest from the deep to rest on land. So you've got the head and the front of him on the land, and then the rest of him is hanging down because it kind of is down into an abyss. His face was a just man's face, outwardly kind. We're going to get a line in our study of Shakespeare's Macbeth. There is no art to find the mind's construction in the face. He was a gentleman on whom I placed an absolute trust. In other words, fraud will always have the face of a gentleman. In other words, somebody that you can trust. A just man's face, outwardly kind. And he was like a serpent. Notice all the serpentine kinds of renderings. Minos, remember, have his tail that wraps around all down his trunk. He had 2 paws, both hairy to the armpits. His back and breast and both sides down to the shank were painted with designs of knots and circlets. Now, a lot has been said about this, and probably the best exemplar of what we're saying here is Dante was already worried that Florence was becoming what Florence would ultimately become, the great city of economics, the exchange and the borrowing of money. And Dante was concerned about this because, of course, Dante will say that this kind of concern will take one away from one's allegiances to God, especially as it relates to the church. One of his biggest beefs with Boniface VIII, and we'll get to him in the next canto, is that that pope, along with other popes, they're always worried about money, right? Now, of course, this is one of those things when we talked about Francis Assisi, we said similar kinds of concerns, right? To continue with the design, the painted design on Geryon. No Tartar or Turk has ever worn a cloth more colored in field and figure, nor were the nets Arachne looms. In other words, the famous story in Ovid's Metamorphosis 6 about that competition between Arachne and Minerva, where Minerva turned her into a spider because she was so good at weaving. The way beached boats, and now we're going to get another word picture about the way he's laying there. The way beached boats are on land and partly in water, or the way the beaver squats to battle fish to the death in the deep drinking German's land, so lay that worst of beasts upon the edge of stone that bounds the sand. By the way, both the beaver and the spider, especially in medieval times, kind of seem to want to represent deception, lies, fraud, that kind of thing. His tail, the Geryon's tail, was quivering and restless in the void where it hung down, squirming its venom fork with an upward twist, armed like a scorpion. And again, the renderings of Geryon, some have likened to what you read in Revelation 9, 7 through 10, and that kind of looks like an individual, a man, but has a tail of a scorpion. Now, this will be Virgil again. Now we must incline our path a little, as far as the evil beast that crouches over there, my master said. So, we descended on the right. This will be the second and the last time in the whole poem that we go to the right. Everything is to the left. Back the last time was Canto 9, line 120. You'll remember, we go back and we made some comments about that. We descended to the right and paced 10 steps along the edge to keep well wide of sand and flames. Coming to where he was, I saw on the sand, just on from where we stood, some people sitting near the open space. So here are the usurers, right? Notice how little of them is actually going to be referenced at all. The master said, but it's important, don't miss this, to experience this ring fully, go forward, learn what their state is, and let your conversation not be long. A couple of observations. First of all, sounding very Platonic. You want to learn something? You have to experience something. Number two, he says don't have a long conversation with them. Get the information you need and get out. Not one word will be spoken from Dante towards these usurers. But let your conversation not be long till you return. I'll parley with this beast so we may borrow his shoulders. Now, I went along to the seventh circle's margin alone. By the way, this is one of those few moments when Dante is completely alone and he does not have Virgil by his side, and there he is all by himself. And passed to where those doleful people sat. Their woes burst from their eyes. It's a compelling image, right? They're so sad. Their hands were doing their best to shield them from the torments, shifting place from here to there. One moment from falling flames, the next the burning ground. Notice, the sodomites have to keep moving physically. Here, the users can sit and they hunch, but they're constantly trying to keep all this fire and brimstone off of them. And then we get the another amazing word picture. Dante the poet is in fine form here, trying to give us descriptors of what it's like to see what it is that Dante the Pilgrim is seeing. And now we get another interesting image. Just like the ways of dogs in summer, when they scratch, sometimes with paw and others with muzzle, they behaved as though fleas or flies or gadflies bit their limbs. In the summer when they're hot, the dog will constantly be scratching. This is what these people are doing. When I grew closer to the people grieved by the flames falling on them, I did not find any I recognized. Because, again, usury, very much like anger earlier, will begin to remove their identity. They cared so much about money, they begin to lose their soul, lose their identity. But I perceived each had a purse hung round his neck. Now this something hanging around a neck to signify what's going on. When we get to Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner, it will be an albatross there. This idea that you got something that kind of is keeping you, hunching you over. This is that idea, and of course represents the greed that would stand behind the usury, right? Adorned these purses, these pouches, these purses around their neck, were adorned with certain colors and a certain device which each of them with hungry eyes, notice we're back to the burst from their eyes, hungry eyes, consumed. So in other words, they're constantly looking at their pouch. Even in their afterlife, they're so concerned about the money that they, of course, gained through usury. You can kind of see where this is headed, right? Looking among them now, we're going to get some interesting identifications. Now what's going to happen here is that Dante, for his day, can make identifications of certain families from Florence, okay, and even individuals possibly, by virtue of just simply the color of the purse, the design of the purse. In other words, the purse comes to be the symbol that represents everything about the family, good or ill, right? Take a look. I saw a yellow purse that bore a lion in azure. There's some people who think that maybe Julie Fianzi, the Black Guelph family, is referenced. By the way, you can pick up some of this in the notes that you will always find attached to any text, and especially in Pinsky's. Looking further, I saw another blood red that showed a goose depicted in a color whiter than butter. The Uribici Ghibelline family is represented here. Then one of them, whose wallet, which was white, displayed a pregnant sow portrayed in azure. This one is the Scorvini family, and they're from Padua. And here we've got Rinaldo di Scorvigini, and he's going to be the one who speaks to Dante, but Dante will never actually talk back. What are you doing in this pit? Be off with you, he says to him. And since you're living, know my neighbor, Valentino, will come to sit here on my left. This is, notice, the second time that a sinner has been nasty to Dante. You'll remember in Canto 8 we had Filippo Argente doing the same thing. By the way, this Valentino is a Paduan money lender. In other words, somebody's coming soon, right? Again, this is Dante's brilliant way to insult people, right, who are going to, and families who are not going to take it so kindly that they end up in hell. These Florentines, he's continuing now to speak, these Florentines die me so because I am a Paduan. Often they cry, bring on the sovereign knight whose sack will show 3 goats. And this is a reference again to another Ghibelline from Florence, Giovanni Belmonte. With that, that's all he says, he twisted his mouth awry in a perverse grimace, and like an ox licking its nose, thrust out his tongue at me. So he sticks his tongue out at Dante. This notion of sticking your tongue out as a form of an insult will forever be locked into our thinking. Once we've seen this, it'll be, of course, from Romeo and Juliet's, do you bite your, thumb at me? Same kind of gesture, like he sticks his tongue out at him. Then, Dante, fearing that a longer stay might vex him, who had cautioned that the time I spent with them be brave, I left those worn-out souls, that's what he calls them, and found my leader already on our mount, Geryon's back, seated upon that savage creature's back, and that's the end of it. That's the entire exchange. Which begs the question for Dante the poet, why wouldn't he give more in exchange? Like, why wouldn't he have Dante, for example, the pilgrim, make some observation that it's you usurers that are ruining Florence? That was some of the suggestions that were made when he was talking with the Sodomites who commented on the fact that Florence was starting to go downhill. Notice we had none of that going on here.